Hello, in this video and the next I'm going to be going over the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report 2021, taking a look at the top 200 films in Hollywood coming out from Hollywood in 2020 to see how diverse they were in terms of race and binary gender. In this video we'll be looking at lead actors and overall cast diversity. Welcome to Hakuna MaChatter, your place for everything positive in diversity and representation in film and TV. If you're new here to the channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Elliot. In this UCLA report, they look at the top 200 films coming out of Hollywood, or at least they have for this report. Things are a little different due to the pandemic year of 2020. So where they usually take into account only theatrically released films, they've also taken into account all streaming films as well. So as I said in this video, I'll be looking at lead actors and overall cast diversity. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right, here's the breakdown of the film release type in 2020 and how they're working it. So streaming, as we can see, accounts for the vast majority of the films that are being assessed within this report. Theatrical is next. Obviously, these are the ones released into cinemas. That's 16.2%. Then comes streaming and limited theatrical release. Next on, we're on to TVOD and theatrical. So TVOD is when you've paid extra after your streaming subscriptions as well as in the theatrical release. So like Disney Plus Premium, for example, paying that extra for the likes of Raya and the Last Dragon, even though that's 2021 film and that film is not considered for this report. But you kind of get what I'm getting at there. And then here we have streaming and a main theatrical release. So this is kind of the model that HBO, that Warner Brothers and Disney will be going forward, releasing their films both theatrically for a normal theatrical run and on streaming as well. Obviously, that's something that's going to be happening mainly on HBO Max with the Warner Brothers films. All right, so now we're getting into leads, and this is where we begin to get into all the real good meaty stuff. All right, so here's the first thing that we need to look at. This is white leads in film, minoritized race in film, and the US population. I'm highlighting that here in the top right-hand corner. And here on this graph, we can see the percentage of population. So we're looking at 2020 here. Now, what we can see is that the minoritized race population of the US is 40.3%, and the representation in leading roles on screen was 39.7%. So they are so close to proportionate representation. And throughout this report, you'll see that everything that UCLA, the way they base everything is the proportionate representation. So if the leading roles had been 40.3% minoritized race, it would have matched the percentage of the minoritized race people in the US population. So we can see here that yes, they are almost at proportionate representation. And as we can see by 60.3% that white leads are still overrepresented in Hollywood. Granted, not by much. You know, the difference there is, what, 0.6%. So there's not a heavy overrepresentation there of white leads in comparison, especially to minoritized race leads. So one thing I wanted to kind of point out here is also this stat here that about 4 out of 10 lead actors in film were minoritized race. Again, we can see like this kind of feels like it's ridiculous, right? That 4 out of 10, what? But when you see here that it's relative to proportionate representation, then it kind of makes a whole lot of sense, and that's kind of all right. It's kind of cool. That's kind of what we should be aiming to reach. I don't know, for me, proportionate representation makes sense. It's kind of when you then break down the races, because obviously just saying minoritized race is one thing, but when you break down race breakdown, because that's when we begin to see the discrepancies, and that's here. So as we can see here that 19% of leads in films in the top 200 Hollywood films of 2020, 90% were black, and this is actually an over-representation. I would try to have a look to find what the race breakdown population for the US was. I could only find stats for 2019, so obviously out of date to this report. But the 2019 stats that showed that black people made 12.2% of the US population. And then we can kind of work through the rest here. The Latinx representation is, in terms of film leads anyway, is the heaviest underrepresentation. as in 2019 Latinx people made up 18.5% of the US population, and here they're only making up 5.4% of the leads coming out of Hollywood films. So that is where, in terms of race diversity, the biggest grounds need to be made. Asian, 5.4%. Again, in their 2019 US population stats, they were at 5.6%, so they're very close to proportionate representation there, though it sadly does count as underrepresented. Mixed representation was heavily overrepresented compared to those 2019 US population stats. That was at 2.8%. And then there was a bit of a discrepancy, and this probably just comes from having the US population of 2019 as opposed to 2020. Here it says, in the report, it says that Native people were underrepresented, and I mean, they're wholeheartedly going to be anyway, aren't they? But according to the 2019 population stats, they would be overrepresented, but I don't see how that would be possible. So, and then we have MENA as well, which is Middle East and North African, and there wasn't a breakdown for the population size in this US population report that I found, unfortunately, so I can't compare that. And then we need to see female leads. Like people of colour or minoritized race people, women have made enormous gains over the course of this report series in their share of top film leads. Women accounted for 47.8% on film leads in 2020, up from 44.1% in 2019, and nearly double the share the group posted in 2011. You can see 2011 is when these reports started, and the growth has been sensational, and so it should be. I mean, kind of the fact that it's taken 10 years, maybe less sensational, but it's we're getting there. We're finally getting there in terms of female representation. Now, yeah, it leaves them just shy of proportionate representation. I'm pretty sure that women outpopulate men in the US, so yeah, I feel that we should be seeing majority female leads over majority male leads. This is the intersectionality now of race and binary gender. I mean, it states other there, you can see with the blue squares. So it'll be non-binary or trans men or trans women. But unfortunately, the UCLA report, it does mention transgender directors, I think, at one point, or writers. But this report generally sticks to the binary genders, which is kind of a bit of a shame. I hope that the 2022 report delves into a bit more. But I mean, these reports have specifically been set out to look at race and binary gender. There's obviously always room to adapt and change that, and maybe even delve into neurodivergent and other abled people as well. So hopefully, they will expand into that in the years to come. But let's focus on what we've got in front of us. So what this is kind of showing is how the intersectionality of race and binary gender plays into the representation of leads in Hollywood. And as we can see here, the only sort of significant disparity is with black leads, and female black leads, really, there's a big drop compared to male black leads. We see with white, not a very big difference. Latinx, not a massive difference. Asian, actually, and mixed race beat their male counterparts, and Native is equal, and again Middle Eastern, North African not really playing the game. And there's going to be, for me, I guess, a slight cohesion between black and Middle Eastern, North African here, and the same with mixed as well, because obviously we have to, for me, I think what plays heavily into this is colorism, in that when you are going to have a black female lead, most people tend to cast lighter skinned, mainly mixed race women, as opposed to darker skinned, medium or darker skinned black women. And so I think that's going to play a heavy part in here. And hopefully it's something that Hollywood can address going forward, and changing colorism and showing, that darker skinned women can play lead roles, because they can, and they have. 13 of them have, or 13% of them have. So, let's get it freaking shaking. Okay, so now we're moving on to overall cast diversity, and this is the telling one for me. This is the big one. So let's slide down here and let's take a look. So here are the stats. So these colorings show how diverse each film is. Obviously the 11 to 50% is a diverse, very diverse cast. Less than 11% is a majority white cast, a vast majority white cast, I should say. Obviously anything sort of, anything below the 41 to 50% essentially is a majority white cast, and over 50% is a majority minoritized race cast. Now, have a look at this. In 2011, 50% of the top Hollywood films were a less than 11% diverse cast. You know, we're looking at that cast was made up of 89% or higher white actors. And now when we get over to 2020, that shift, look at that shift when we get to 2020, 30%, nearly a third of the films now. We've shifted from a half being vast majority white cast to nearly a third being vast majority minoritized race. That's a crazy shift over 9 years. I don't know, like, it's moments like this where when you kind of think diversity and representation isn't happening, I don't know, for me, there's moments like this when you look at this and you go, fucking hell, it's a shift, it's happening, it's out there. So I'm really impressed by this. Hopefully you are. Let me know in the comment section down below. But I love this, and I love to see this, and this is what I want to see more of. So, and it's not just me. When I get to the box office stats later on, and you know, we're talking theatrical box office tickets, we're talking household ratings, you'll see why this shift is crazy. In 2011, most films fell into the least diverse cast diversity interval, less than 11% minority. By 2020, the plurality of films, 28.8%, fell into the most diverse interval, films with a majority minoritized race cast. By contrast, the fewest films fell into the least diverse interval in 2020, only about 10% of films. There's like, a 40 percentage point decline over the last decade. Incredible. So let's have a look at that breakdown then, that race breakdown. So again, the black share of all top film roles increased to 19.4% in 2020, up from 15.7%. It's a 4-point uptake, marking the third year in a row for which this group was overrepresented amongst these roles. And as the same in earlier years, Latinx, Asian and Native persons remained underrepresented among all top films. But collectively, though, as a whole, the minoritized race gang are very close there to the proportional representation. In fact, they exceeded proportionate representation for the first time at 42%. So we know that 40.3%, which is the proportionate representation, we got to 42%. So minoritized race share of all film roles exceeded proportionate representation for the first time in Hollywood. This is what I'm saying, that 2020 in front of the camera, there was a stark difference. Okay, so let's see that race breakdown is with its intersectionality with binary gender. So we can see there's a bit of non-binary and trans numbers here as well, which is great to see. But we're going to focus, as the report focuses, mainly on the binary genders here. And yeah, I mean, you know, the same thing when it comes to white and black representation, that women are failing in their parity when it comes to, I mean, they're not failing themselves, they're being failed in their parity with their male counterparts. Whereas Latinx, Asian, I'll get that thing out of the way. Let me do that. Latinx, Asian, mixed race, native, they're meeting parity or exceeding or close to parity. But also Middle Eastern, North African is still a long way off as well. And again, I reckon, you know, you look at the black stats here, you look at the mixed race stats here, you look at the MENA stats here. Again, I question how much of that comes to colorism and how much lighter skinned people are favoured over darker skinned, well, especially when it comes to female actors. It's an issue, and the numbers are showing the issue is there. So thank you for checking out this first video as I take a look at the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report 2021. In the next video, we'll be looking at directors, writers, and the box office results from 2020 as well, which of course is also taking into account the household ratings from streaming services. So if you'd like to see that video, make sure you subscribe, turning on the bell notification. And for now, make sure you check out these other wonderful videos on diversity and representation here on the channel. Hakuna MaChatter.